Hi everyone, it's a few minutes early, but I just wanted to hop on to make sure this was going through. If somebody could send me a message to let me know that this is being broadcast properly. And also I wanted to see if everybody had a chance or wanted to do a pattern. So I had made a pattern and I did upload it to all of the different event sites. You can, if you want to, trace it with some of the carbon paper onto your paper. Hey Mel, thanks for stopping over. And you can just do the basic outlines. I did do them in color here just so you would know what was what, but you can absolutely download that or print that off from the all the different event places that I posted that. It's in the comment section, and it's not necessary. We're going to be doing kind of a layering technique, so it's do one section and then let it dry a little bit. So we're going to be hopping around quite a bit as we're working on this one, because you want to let your areas dry, and that way you don't have to use a heat tool or a hair dryer or anything. I don't like using a hair dryer because we are going to be using a lot of moisture on this, even though we're not doing a background that's got a lot of water. So it's not, I did not tape it down. Y'all know I'm terrible about that. I tend to not tape things down, and I always like to work all the way to my edges, but you do get a beautiful border if you do tape this down. This is the 9x16, 9x6, no, 6x9 pad from Michaels. It is their Artist Loft Level 2. It is pretty decent. It's not too bad for practicing. It's a nice size if you're going to be doing cards or anything. And it is the exact same as the Strathmore 400 cellulose paper. So the reason I'm using the cellulose is I do want to get those little blooms like we've got going on here. I think that adds some great texture. If you were working with the 100% cotton paper, the bee paper, or arches or anything like that, it's going to take a whole lot longer for it to dry, and it's going to be nice and even out all of your colors for you. But we want to have these little blooms that we've got kind of going on here to give us some different texture and some different interest. So this one I did put a little bit of metallic on, as y'all can see, just a little bit to catch the light. This was the second one I did. And I, once again, didn't draw this out at all. I just started painting. And this was the first one I had done. And this one does not have any metallic on it. I still think it's very, very pretty, and I don't necessarily think that it needs any metallic. So you can do whatever you like. Just when you are using the metallic, be certain that you don't cover your entire painting in the metallic, or it will not catch the light, and it's going to, the whole thing is going to be shiny, and then your eyes kind of go out of focus and you lose all of your definition and all that really cool texture that we're trying to get with this. So that said, I'm going to tear that one off. I will leave this one over here for y'all to, so you can keep an eye on it, kind of use it for reference. Like I said, you also do have your pattern, and even if you don't use it, sometimes it is nice to kind of have it in front of you. So once again, you can see where the reference is, where your petals are, where your leaves are. This is really full, and you don't have to be nearly that full when you're doing this. You can just do 1 or 2 rosebuds. You can do just 1 or 2 leaves. You could even just do it maybe half of the paper, which I think we might do for this one. Just kind of keep everything on the one side so it'll be asymmetrical. And then that way also it'll be a little bit quicker, but you will learn all of the techniques, so you can then do as much or as little as you want. All right, got 6 people watching. That's awesome. And you can text me in the comments. You can send me messages if you have any questions. I'm going to be going over what I'm using. I am going to be using my silver brush black velvet brushes. I'm mostly going to be using my number 12 brush, which is right here. It's a nice big round brush. I'm going to be using my number 8, my number 6, which I only have in a travel brush, and my number 4. those are the majority of the brushes I'm going to be using. I do have them all out just in case I feel like I need it. This is a sword brush, which is really fun if you want to be doing any kind of like reeds, or we could probably use them for the branches or our berries, anything like that. If you wanted to use a long sword brush, that's an interesting shape. We'll definitely be doing something with that in the future. I have a brand new number 10 that is so spanking new. I haven't even taken the plastic off of it yet. We are going to also be using the white Nights St Petersburg paints. These are paints that are out of Russia. I think the only place that you can get them is on Amazon. And this is a set of 36. They are really nice because they are a semi-moist paint. They're a little bit, not quite in a Gansai, but a little bit of a Gansai type texture. They reactivate very, very easily. They are full pans of each. So that's a great deal on that. I did do a color swatch, so I know what colors I'm using. There is a separate palette that attaches down here, and I have disengaged that and set that up so you'll be able to see the colors that I'm mixing. I will tell you the colors that I'm mixing also. Plus, I'm going to tell you some kind of colors that will work in other sets. Cotman is one that I recommend a lot for my students to use. It has a really nice little travel set that's got 14 colors in it. It's very comprehensive, easy to mix anything that you might not have right in front of you. This just happens to have a lot of really usable convenience colors. This particular color here, this black green, which is literally just Payne's gray mixed with your sap green, but it is so nice to have on hand and I always have it ready to go. I use the lemon yellow a lot. As you can tell, it's really dirty. I tend to not clean my palette off. I like to reuse my paints. I'm super lazy like that. I know that kind of drives a lot of people crazy. What you can do is just take a damp cloth and wipe that off if you want to clean that up. So I've got a tub of water over here that's off camera. If you happen to see my hand go up, I'm always picking up water. I have a nice big tub of water. I've got some tissues and paper towels that I use them a ton before I throw them out. That's just the recycler in me, I guess. I am also going to be, if we do the metallic, use some of my Finetec. I do have several other metallic sets, but I like the payoff of the Finetec. It seems to have the largest amount of mica in it, and mica is the iridescent metallic-y sheen that gives those their beautiful colors. So, everybody ready? Y'all set? I'm going to start with my big poinsettia right in the middle. That's going to be our first layer, and first thing we're going to do is we're going to do these large petals. These would be our bottom petals. That would be the farthest down if we were going from our farthest away to the closest, like you would almost do in a acrylic painting. So you tried to get the white night ones? Yeah, unfortunately, I got mine maybe about a year or so ago. There are a couple of eBay sellers that have them in stock. You can check that out. There is even an eBay seller, and I'm sorry I don't remember their name, where you can buy the individual pans of the white night. But a great substitute is really any type of paint. You could use the Sennelier, you can use Cotman, you can use anything that you want. This isn't a type of painting where you need to be worrying about how much oxgal is in it, so it's going to bleed out for you, or what, the color shift is going to be. This is fairly basic, so you can use any type of watercolor you want, even Crayola, Prang, does not matter. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wet my nice big number 12 round. I'm going to mix this light reddish color here, and what that is if you don't have one that's a premix, you would use alizarin crimson and cad red light mixed together, and we're going to keep this more towards the orangey side. So this is going to probably be 75% cad red light, 25% alizarin crimson. The alizarin crimson is sometimes called carmine, depending on the set you have, And we want this quite thin. You can see that on my palette. You can see my palette through my paint. We want to start with the lightest, most transparent, and we are going to move to a heavier, thicker, more opaque layer as we come up in the painting. So I have my brush really almost to the point of dripping because I'm going to want to try and do this in one nice big stroke. So I'm going to imagine this is my center. I'm going to leave a good 1/2 inch circle where I'm not going to put any paint in. I'm going to take my brush, push down as much as I can to spread those bristles out, slowly drag my brush about 2 inches, and then gently lift it up off my paper like a plane leaving the runway. And we're going to do 6 of these. I'm going to add a little bit more paint. This paper, because it is a cellulose, you do get a lot of color shift. This is going to dry so much lighter than it looks right now. And I want to have more color concentrated on the edge and a little bit of less color towards the center. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. So I have 6 large kind of base petals for my poinsettia. So again, I'm loading my brush up. I have mixed up quite a bit of this paint, so I don't have to keep mixing it. And we're going to use every bit of this up. So I'm going to pull a little bit, push my brush down as far as I can get those bristles to spread out, slowly drag it, and gently lift my brush up till it comes back to a point, and just touch in a little bit of extra color around my edges. And that paint is going to spread out and give you some really interesting blooms. So we'll be able to have some great texture. I'm going to push down, drag very slowly. I'm going slowly because I want the paint on my brush to be able to catch up with the motion of my movement. Touch my center there. Let that sit here where you've got this buildup of color. That's okay because we are going to end up, like I said, with those really cool blooms. Load up my brush, push down, drag, lift up. That was a little bit lighter than I wanted, so I'm just going to add a little bit of extra color. And because I'm going to call it the petal, but it's really not the petal. These are actually the leaves of the poinsettia. The flower part of the poinsettia is this very center. Those are the only flowers. All of this red here is not the flower or the petals. Those are actually the leaves. So I'm going to come down, push my brush, slowly drag it, and lift it up. If you don't have a big enough brush, you can absolutely do this in 2 strokes. I'll show you on the next one how to do 2 strokes. So if you don't have a large enough brush, you can do like a leaf. You can come around, lift it up, or if you want to just have some more fuller petals, start back at the same point, come to the other side, and fill up the other side there. So that gives you a little bigger style petal. Oh, you sure you got enough watercolors there, Sharon? There's always more. So you can see this is really wet. So we're going to actually move on and do the leaves for our mistletoe while this is drying. You see how much water's on there? If we used a hairdryer, that would get blown all over the place. And right now, that is not the type of technique that we want, but that's going to dry really cool. Clean out your brush, dry it. Now we're going to use our number 6 round, or our number 8, I should say. So I have mixed a little bit of a bluish green. So you're going to use your sap green, or the color that you have closest to sap green, and you're going to add a little tiny bit of cerulean blue to it. And it's going to give you this more of a cool type green, because we want to have, there's a lot of green in this, and we want to have different varieties of it. You don't want it all to have the exact same green. It'll look a little flat. That's definitely something like when you're doing a landscape that has a lot of greens in it, you really want to vary your greens and vary your different values. So to do these leaves here, which are supposed to be, they're kind of reminiscent of the little teardrop shaped leaf that is in a mistletoe. And we're going to do those also with one stroke. So I have my brush loaded up pretty heavily again. These are just basically a tap and go. So I'm going to build this up on either side of my poinsettia. So I'm just going to take my brush, tap it, and pick it up. As soon as you see that you're not getting an end that's nice and rounded, make sure that you get more paint. And we want these, once again, to be pretty thin consistency of paint. So you want this to be like a tea consistency. We want these to be fairly transparent. And you'll notice that the paint does kind of collect in some areas. Once again, we want that to happen. So just touch, touch. Be patient. Some of them can be out a little bit at a curve. Do some of them a little smaller. Once again, if that doesn't fill in, just go ahead and take the tip of your brush, touch. That just means that you don't have enough paint in the belly of your brush. Make sure you're leaving lots of white space here. We need to have the space in between to, once again, give yourself some dimension and some depth, but also because we need to have room for our other elements, for the berries, and for some little branches and little extra sprigs. So just touch and gently lift it up. Make certain, like I said, that you have a brush that has a nice fat belly on it. So when you touch it down, you get that teardrop shape, and it deposits most of the paint down at the tip of the little leaf, and then that way you're going to get a natural type of shading. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing down here. Is everybody doing okay? I'm going to flip this around because I don't want my hand to be in your way. There we go. You don't want to come too far in by your poinsettia because we are going to be doing several other layers of petals on that. And notice I do kind of let the brush sit there for a second. That way I do let the paint have a chance to catch up and travel down to the bristles of my brush. So do a few that are smaller. You don't want them all to be like cookie cutter stamps. I think a few of my students may have heard that once or twice before. You don't want them all to look perfect. There, I think that's probably enough, and we can always go back and add a few more if we want to. But like I said, we want to make sure that we have enough room in between so we can put our little mistletoe berries in there. This is on the traced picture, Sue. It's these here. All right, once again, we gotta let that dry. These are still quite wet. So we can put in, while those are drying, we're gonna put in our little berries here. And they're kind of a dirty mix. So you're going to put a little bit of lemon yellow in with a tiny little bit of burnt umber, and you're going to get this really kind of yellowy, dirty mix. And I mean, it is the tiniest bit of burnt umber. Like literally, if you have a dirty spot on your palette, just use that. It's a tiny bit of a greenish tint to it, and we want this uber thin. You really want to be able to see this. These are just, when you're doing anything white, you're just basically painting in the shadows of it. So we really want this to be so thin that you can see the paper right through it. And we are just going to paint little circles. And you're going to make sure that you leave the top part of that circle with a little white spot on it. I'm using the tip of my brush. I'll put a few of these in and then I'll bring it closer to the camera for you. If your leaves are not 100% dry and they bleed in, that's okay. That really helps with that loose look that everybody's always trying to achieve with their watercolor. And the paint will kind of collect around the edges and give you a natural shadow. But these are just kind of the suggestion of some mistletoe berries, and I have my paintbrush pretty filled because I want, and I'm keeping it fairly straight up and down perpendicular to the paper because I want that paint to come down. I don't want it to be pointy looking. So you do have to actually draw these in. They're generally in little clusters. If you happen to have one and you accidentally fill in your little highlight, don't worry about it. We are going to put a little tiny dot of green to help define them a bit. So let me bring that up so you can see it better. All right, I'm going to flip my paper around and do them on the other side here. Now your paint has had a few seconds to kind of sit and possibly thicken up. If it thickened up, it's going to be a more concentrated color, so just make sure that you add a little bit more water to it. They don't have to be perfectly round. Maybe they're being a little bit covered up by one of the leaves, or they're just having an odd reflection. It's just the suggestion of them. So just kind of a little dirty brown there. I hope y'all can see this. It's really light. Maybe a little one down here. Once again, we can always add more if we need to, but don't overdo it right now because we do want to have plenty of space in between so we can add all of our other elements. And I think that's probably pretty okay for now. So a couple of my petals here are getting dry enough that we could start to layer, but this one here is still quite wet. Clean off your brush, dry it off. So we could, yeah, I think we can do our next layer of poinsettia petals, but do you see how we got those cool texture in there from letting those back runs happen? Sometimes they're called a back run, sometimes they're called a cauliflower, sometimes they're called a mistake. But on this, it's what we're going for. So we're going to take our number 12 again, our number 12 brush, nice big brush, and we're going to use that same mix that we had. Now this has probably thickened up a little bit, which is good. We want to have more pigment. If you need to mix more, go ahead and mix more. We are going to use that Cad Red Light and your alizarin crimson, which is sometimes called carmine, sometimes called Crimson Lake, sometimes it is called cerise. It's going to be more of the alizarin crimson this time, probably a 50-50 with the Cad Red Light. And you get this beautiful kind of bright cherry type red. And we do want to have more pigment this time than we did on the first time through. So I have my brush really loaded up again. I'm going to start at the center. I'm once again making sure that I leave some space, and then these petals are not going to be as far out as the first layer. So I'm going to touch that down, gently drag it, and pull it up. Do you see how you can see the overlap? That is exactly what we are going for. Oop, wet berry. He went bye-bye. Trying to avoid a couple of those berries, put some more of that color, tap it into my edges. Still make sure that you try and leave that center open. That one is still really wet, but I think we can sneak one over here. So now I put a little bit more paint on my brush, and I want to define these edges just a little bit more because we want to have that overlap be pretty visible. All right, does not have to be perfect, and you don't have to follow the pattern. We're just trying to put the second layer on. So if I just attach that, it's going to follow that edge and it's not going to go into areas that are dry. Can I sneak one in here? Yes. Hey, Pat. Navon, I cannot answer messenger questions while I've got this on live. If I go to your messenger, it will cut out the live feed. So if you have any questions, make sure that you put them in the comments for the live. All right, so that's going to dry some more. And while that is drying, we are going to be putting in our 3 large leaves. So I'm going to clean off my brush, and I am going to use my number 12 brush again. And I'm not going to take all the water off of it. Ooh, some of that red got into that green. That's not good. Let's get some. I'm going to add some of my lemon yellow. Now, I had to be kind of careful with lemon yellow. It's a crazy thing because lemon yellow in acrylic paint is super transparent. In watercolor paint, it's very opaque. So I'm going to add my leaves, and I'm going to add one leaf coming off here into the corner, a leaf that's down here in the space that I left, and then another one coming off into the corner. And then that's going to give us some nice balance. So I am just drawing in the shape, giving a little wiggle on this edge, coming to a point, adding a little bit extra paint. Now I'm going to take my, you can either use your mop or you can use your number 8 round, and it just has water on it. And I'm going to bring in that edge just with the water, because I do want my paint to kind of puddle in these edges. Just that simple. All right, load up your paint again with that nice bright green. Now, do you see how this green here is a very different tone from that green? And we want that. I'm going to just draw in a shape of a leaf. I'm wiggling my brush a little bit because I don't want to have perfectly smooth edges. Poinsettia leaves are a little wiggly. They're not super jagged or don't have the serrations on them, but they're not a perfectly smooth, like eye shape, like a birch leaf would be. All right, and then I'm going to, once again, take my water, just clear water on my brush. And you have to do this right away because this paper dries super fast. And if you don't do it right away, you will end up with hard lines that are going to be tough to get rid of. And then we have one down here. Can you see how this is building up layer after layer? Getting plenty of paint on there. And then my wet brush with just water, pull that in. And I'm leaving a little white space here on some of these. So once again, that's something very indicative with watercolor that we like to do. It gives you some break and it makes it look like it's a watercolor. Okay. So we are going to kind of connect some of our leaves and our stems here on our berries. So I have my number 8 and I've mixed a little darker green. I mixed a little bit of Payne's gray in with my green, and we're going to attach our berries with some little stems here. So they don't quite, and it doesn't have to be a perfect connection. We just want to give the impression that they're not floating in the air. And give a few little flicks here. Fill in some of that open space. All right. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So I'm going to flip my paper over. Get some of that darker green. And it's all right if you touch something that's a little wet, gives you a nice organic feeling to it where you don't have a defined break and where one element starts and the other one ends. Okay, and I'm just going to, once again, I have a little bit on my brush. I like that green. I'm just going to give it a few little wisps coming out. Not too much, just to fill in a little bit of that negative space. All right, it's looking pretty good. That leaf is getting nice and dry. I still have a few quite wet petals here. This I'm going to soak up with my dry brush just a little bit because I want to be able to move on. And if I don't, it's going to take an hour for that to dry. So that's dry and that's dry. So I'm going to get this dark green, which was my leaf green mixed with my Payne's gray. Nice and dark. I'm going to draw in my veins. Now this is not 1000% dry, so you're going to get some of this nice bleeding out. That's going to dissipate and we can go back and tighten that up a little bit if you want to. Yeah, that one's a little bit wet. We're going to lose all that definition, but that's all right. We'll go back when it's dry. Okay, let's just do a few little more wisps here just because I have paint on my brush. Don't fill it in too much. We still need to have room for our roses. Okay. How's everybody doing? Go ahead and clean out your brush. And we are now going to do our roses. So the roses are a color that is called, in this particular palette, it's called Cerise. It is a kind of a purpley pink. Quinacridone magenta would be really good. Cobalt violet would be really good. Theo violet, if you have Grumbacher or Cotman, would be really good. Purple Lake, I think is what it's called in Cotman. And it's a fairly, we're going to be using a little bit heavier mix. So this is a more like a milk consistency instead of tea. I don't have my brush as heavily loaded up, and I'm going to make sure that I don't have any drips on the ferrule of my brush because I don't want those coming down into where I'm going to be placing my roses. So to do the roses, and I want y'all to see, okay, I practice this stuff all of the time. So I am constantly practicing. So yes, it's going to look a little bit easier for me because I have done a lot of them. But it's not hard. It's basically a jagged, wonky looking oval. And then we're going to make a little funnel shape down below it. And you can see it on your drawing here as well. It's just a jaggedy oval, spiral like a jelly roll or a cinnamon bun. And then you just draw a little funnel connecting the bottom of it. Okay? So, like I said, I have this fairly heavy. And I'm going to put 2 little baby roses here, one down here. Oh, well, I'm going to do one down here, one over here, and may or may not put one over on that edge. Maybe sneak a little baby one in there. So I'm going to flip this just a little bit so it's a better angle for me to get these 2 in here. And we want them to look like they're kind of peeking out from underneath the leaves. So I'm Got my brush straight up and down, perpendicular to my paper. I'm going to start in the center and do my little spiral, and you see how I'm kind of flattening it out? And then I push down, come down here, give it a little petal that's coming down, push that down, okay? Then I'm going to connect to my edge, connect to my edge here. Now, don't worry up here where it's not quite as dark as you might think you want it. We're going to go back in. All right, now you could either clean this brush off or you can use another brush. I'm going to use my little number 4 round, and I just have water on it, and I'm just touching the edge of that color to pull that in. Just so it's a little bit messier. With this type of technique, messier is better. Okay, I'm going to let that kind of settle down and do its thing. And we're going to do another little baby rose right here. So we have this one looking off in this direction. We're going to have this one going the other direction. Making sure, because I'm starting in the center, that I'm leaving enough room in between them. Leave lots of white space. I find that the more white space you can leave, the better your roses will turn out. And then connect your little funnel down at the bottom here. Maybe a little color up in there. Wet my brush. It's not dripping, but it is wet. Wet enough that I can pull that color in. Now this is going to dry dark, lighter, much lighter, and we are going to go back in and give a little more definition to our centers. So don't think that you need to get this all done in one step. All right, really, really simple. It's just the idea of a rose. This is not, you know, a botanical drawing by any stretch of the imagination. But when somebody looks at this, they know that that's a little rosebud. Oh, thanks for coming, Margie. I appreciate it. Okay, so let's get a little rosebud down here, and I don't want it perfectly centered in there. I think that might look a little weird. So I'm going to go a tiny bit off center here, and I'm going to have it angling a little bit towards the corner. Just go slow, let that paint catch up. I'm pushing down to get some variation in my line thickness. See how that looks kind of like a little cinnamon bun? Picking up a little tiny bit more paint. Come down. Make my little funnel. Okay, I want more darkness. I do want a little more dark in here. So I just picked up more paint. Just going back over it. All right, and my brush, my little number 4, a little bit of water on it just to soften some of these edges. Now this particular color happens to be quite staining, so you would not be able to lift this color back out. So if you leave hard edges and you don't go back in right away, you are going to end up with those hard edges. I just want to tap in some color there and let that bleed out a little bit. Seriously, the messier you can do these, the better they turn out every time. So I'm going to flip this around a little bit. All right, I think we might do one little rose in here, just really peeking out. Like I said, you can practice these, even just one of these with a stem on it makes a really pretty card or a beautiful bookmark. You always want your roses to be darker in the center. When you see a rose and it's closed up, it's like a spiral. and you want it to, you see how much darker that is there than the outside? It's really important that you have your rose be darker on the inside than the outside. Pull that down, make my little funnel. Make sure that I'm leaving enough white space. Take my number 4 brush, it's got just a little bit of water on it. Just tap it to the edge of that paint. Let it flow and do its thing. Okay, so we have 4 now. I do like to have an odd number if possible. So I'm going to whip this around a little bit. Try to not hit my tripod too much. For me, it's always easier for me to pull my brush towards me. So I do like to have my painting oriented like that as I'm working on it. It's just a lot easier for me. If you find that you can do it anyway, that is, you know, facing a different direction, whatever works best for you. All right, so we got 1, 2, and you can see with the color, if you look away from this, we've got this heavy bright color down here, so we definitely need to get something up here. So I probably shouldn't have put these little wisps in there, but I did not contain myself. So I'm going to try and cover them up because this color is a little bit darker. Maybe I can pull it away a little bit farther. I'm letting the bristles of the brush, like I said, go in all kind of different thicknesses, and thin, thick and thin. And then just right from the corner there, make a little funnel, a little funnel. Bring that down. Might have to put a little more color in that one just so it covers up that greenery. Although when we're done, we can go back and put some greenery back on top. I don't want to cover up too much of my poinsettia petal because that is supposed to be on top. There. All right, that's all you need. We're going to go back and we're going to put some little leaves in. Like I said, we're going to darken up these centers a little bit more because you can see there's quite a bit of color shift on this paper, and a lot of it has to do with the paper and not with the paint. There's always going to be some color shift with watercolor paint, but when you use a cellulose paper, you're going to find there's going to be a much more dramatic color shift than if you use a cotton paper. All right, I think these here are nice and dry, so we can get our last layer on top of our poinsettia, these darker ones here. So we're going to take that either Purple Lake, Theo Violet, Cerise, whatever it's called, and we're going to add that to our red mix that we had used, which was the 50% alizarin crimson, 50% cad red light. And I'm adding that on, and I'm making it quite a bit darker and quite a bit a thicker consistency. So this is definitely more like the consistency of whole milk. And you can see that color right there. We want this to be a really pretty dark cherry red. If you want your poinsettia to be a different color, you can certainly make it any color that you like. All right, so I have, and now I am using my number 8 brush because these are much smaller petals. So I want to make sure these are nice and dry. I'm going to start at my center again, push down, lift up. Do you see how much darker that is? And it's almost a cooler tone. Slowly lift up. I'm really loading up my brush. Push down, lift up. So you want to be able to see those layers underneath, but you still want to be able to see the definition of these petals as well. A little bit extra dark in that center. You can sneak a little baby one in here. It doesn't have to connect at the bottom. That is fine if there's some break, and I actually do prefer that. Push down. Notice these are smaller, they're shorter, they're thinner. Define those edges if you need to go back in. Go ahead and do that while it is wet. If you do it while it's wet, you're going to still get some nice blending. If you wait until it dries, you are going to end up with an outline, and we don't want it to look like an outline. We just want it to look like a gradient. Notice I am still leaving my center empty. Push down, gently lift up. We want these to be kind of a little more variety, probably in the size and the shape. Yep, got that connected. Oh well. It'll be okay. That one didn't get as dark as I wanted. I'm going to go back over it. Alright, I want these to be quite dark. So as they start to dry, you definitely can go over those edges a little bit more. And I want to get a little one in here for some symmetry. Let's see, maybe a little baby one. Right there. I think that's looking pretty good. We can reassess it when it dries. But for now, I'm pretty happy with that. Let's get that point in there so when we put our center in, it'll look like it's attached. Okay, while you have this much darker tone on your brush, your roses are probably dry enough now that you can go back in and give them a little bit more definition. Just make sure that they're fairly dry, otherwise you're going to lose anything that you put in. And I'm just going to hit some of these edges with my paint, just to get a little bit more depth in that center. This one I'm trying to cover up some of that green. There. All right, flip this around. Get a little bit more over here. But notice I am still leaving a lot of white space. And that, I think, is the key to these. That's a little thick. There we go. All right. This one here is a little bit darker, and I'm okay with that because it's a little bit more tucked underneath that petal. All right. Looking pretty good, looking pretty good. How you guys doing? Any questions? Let's see. Oh, thanks, Stacy. I appreciate that. And this is going to be on a full replay, so you will absolutely be able to replay this later if you want to make it. I'm also going to upload it onto YouTube. But for some reason, YouTube and Facebook Live do not like each other. I honestly think it's intentional on YouTube's part. So when I upload it onto YouTube, it ends up being only in 480, no matter how high of definition I actually do the original video in. So even though I'm doing the original video in 1080, which is the highest, I will upload it onto YouTube and it's going to end up being in 480, which is a lot grainier and blurrier. So if you can rewatch it on the YouTube, excuse me, on the Facebook, you will get a much better quality replay. All right. I'm not mad with any of that. I think that's looking pretty good. So now we are going to put our little green dots in. So I'm just going to use my same brush here because this number 8 brush has a really good point on it. And I can see I have some kind of fuzz in there. Let's get rid of that. That could come back to haunt me. See that? All right. Once again, make sure I don't have any water drops on the ferrule of my brush. I don't want those dripping down. And I'm just going to give a little bit of a dash right next to my highlight that I tried to leave. Even if you didn't leave one, that's okay. Just put a little dot in there. And it kind of helps define the berry, and it also gives the berry direction. So this one here doesn't have my highlight in it. I'm still going to go in and just give it a little dot, and now it looks like it's all connected. Just because I have a little different color on here, get some variation in there. There we go. All right, I'm going to do the same thing down here on these berries. Do you see how, and I'll pull this up closer to the camera so you can see it better. The color, because of this type of paper, kind of pools around the edge of what your wet area was when you painted, and it gives you a really cool outlining type effect without being very, it's really subtle, I guess is what I'm trying to say. All right, this one's dry, my leaf, so I'm going to go back in and give it some veins while I have that darker on there. Yeah, I kind of like that one. Maybe just tighten that edge up a bit. And on this one here, I'm going to go back over it. So see if your paint bleeds out. That's not a mistake. Once you get another little bit of definition on top of it, it actually just acts as a nice shadow for you. You know, because you planned it that way. All right, so I have my brush with this dark green on it. I'm going to also pick up a little bit of this lighter green, so I kind of have both on my brush. You can't see it super well, but there's the darker green on the outside and that lighter green at the tip. And I'm going to, because my roses are dry, give them these little applets, calyces that you see that kind of come around on rosebuds. And it's going to make them be a little bit connected. So I'm pushing my brush down, just the tip, and I'm wiggling it and pulling it up. I am not in love with that color. I'm going to get something a little brighter. So I'm picking up the color on, this palette happens to be called leaf green. No, excuse me, it's called grass green. And I just added a little bit of that to it and it brightened it up a bit. And I'm touching, and then I'm just wiggling. Touching. So when I touch, the point of my brush kind of goes to the side, and that's actually what I'm trying to get it to do. There's my stem connecting that. So I'm pushing down, my point of my brush goes a little sideways, and I give it a little wiggle as I'm pulling it away from the paper. Going all different directions here. And you can have some kind of overlapping on your leaves, as long as your leaves are dry. And that will give you some nice variation in all of these greens that we have going on. So make sure that you put a stem. If there's anywhere that you could see where your roses would possibly be connecting, so maybe these roses are coming through here, so maybe there's a stem that's down here. And you want the leaf to be on top of it, so that would be underneath. Try to not go too much on top of your leaf with those stems, because you're going to be able to see the leaf through it. All right, and this one here, let's get some those little calyces. Let's connect that down in there. I like to have a few kind of coming up from the top, like they're just having the bud kind of open up, and you can still see the aplets that were around the bud, protecting it. Make sure they're all going different directions. Kind of the looser and more haphazard you can be with this, I honestly think is the better way to go. All right, I want to get some brighter green. Like almost a real yellowy green. The that lemon yellow is a good one. I have a dirty brush that has green on it, so I mixed it up. And I got this nice bright green here. And I'm going to use that in between. Just a sweep of it. Brighten up these big leaves. I am not blending these in. This is a little bit more of a graphic or a posterized kind of look. But that'll give us a little bit of a highlight in between the veins. Now here I have this nice light area, and I didn't go back over it because I did really like that, so I left that showing. All right, so while we have this a little bit more green, we're going to give a little sweep on some of our berries. Because they are white, they would be reflecting the green from our leaves. So towards the bottom of the berry, just giving them a little sweep. It's going to warm them up a bit. It's going to give them a little more dimension. So I want you to see if you can see the difference. So see how this one here, I did that little extra sweep on those berries. This one here I did not. So they still look a little bit flat. It's that lemon yellow mixed in with your leaf green. If you happen to have the Cotman set, it would be, once again, lemon yellow mixed in with your sap green. If you have Grumbacher's, I like using the Hooker's green better than the sap green. I think the sap green is a little bit too almost neon-y. But once again, you would still use that lemon yellow. I'm just giving these all a little kind of haphazardly sweep on there. There. Now, because I have this brighter yellow on my brush, I am going to use it for a few little highlighted grass. Okay. See how that brightens that up? I am just letting the brush do the work. Just using the point of my brush. Trying to get more variety in my greens. Okay. Any questions? I don't see any, so I am going to move on to, well, actually, you know what? I have this good green here, pretty heavy on my brush. I'm going to actually put in, now that this is dry in my center, we are going to dab, and I take my brush and I have it straight up and down and I push down, and it gives me kind of an irregular shape, and I like that for the center of my flower. These are the actual little flowers on a poinsettia. Try to not have them touching each other too much. You don't want them bleeding into each other, and we still want to leave some of that white showing in the center. But see how you get these great irregular shapes for the little flowerets? Okay, we're going to let that dry, and you'll find when it dries it really mutes down quite a bit, and we can actually go back with some darker green in there. Okay, all we have left is our boughs, our pine boughs. Oh, and then if we want to do a little bit of these little branches that I did, they're kind of fun. Actually, they're a lot of fun. So I'm going to once again use my number 8 brush, clean it out. Now I'm using a color that's called Van Dyke Brown. It's a very, very dark brown, but you can also use burnt umber with a tiny little bit of black in it. Works really well. Or if you have raw umber, if you have sepia, any of those colors will work. So you just want this really dark brown here. All right, so I'm going to first put in my branches for my pine boughs. My camera is actually getting warm. Sorry about that little movement there. All right, so I have my brush, and I'm going to kind of pull out, push down, pull out, push down, pull out, push down, because I want to have this little jaggedness going. And I don't want them being perfectly straight. I want them all to have a little bit of curve, because we're kind of bringing the design in this direction from corner to corner on our paper. So you can have one kind of come in here, push down, and a little bit of a point at the end. You can look at the pattern if you want to put them exactly where I did. I am just looking at my configuration here and seeing where I need to have some balance. Filling in some of my areas that are a little bit too light and don't have some kind of a design element in them. So I've got some coming here and here, and I definitely am going to need one coming out this way. And because these are kind of dark, you can go over some of your berries and some of your leaves. I think that's totally okay. All right, and maybe one. So I've got that one going that way, this and this, this and that. I might want one kind of coming out as if it was, yeah, crossing in through here. Thicken that up. So just like any other time you do a branch, it's going to be thicker at the base, thin out towards the tip. And we just want these quite dark, especially if you are going over another element like these berries over here. All right, let me see. Well, I think we might get these in, and then we will decide if we need more or less. All right, I'm just giving them a second, just a few seconds here to dry. While I am doing that, I really thinned my paint down. You can see right through it here. And I'm gonna do a few of these kind of little sprigs coming out. That's a little too cool. I want that a little bit warmer. So I'm going to actually add some burnt sienna to it. The burnt sienna is pretty weak in this set. I don't really know that I'm in love with all of their earth colors. Let me bring that down a little bit more so y'all can see. So here's a little bit warmer, and I'm just going to do some jaggedy branches. Just fill in some area, give it a little bit more movement. Give those other branches a few seconds to dry. They don't need to be dried perfectly before we put on our pine boughs. It's okay if your needles blend a little bit with the branch. I'm just kind of touching, being really loose, filling in any areas that seem to be a little too starkly white. All right, I want a little bit more variation on that edge because that one is a little bit thicker. Looking good, looking good. All right. I'm going to clean off this number 8, and I am going to use my number 4 for the actual needles. Now I have several different greens on my palette, and I am going to use them all. First, we're going to start with our middle green, which would be leaf green or sap green, hooker's green. Any of those will work. You can certainly mix it yourself if you want to mix a nice green with a, you want it to be a little bit earthier, so maybe yellow ochre and phthalo blue would be good. So I've got my brush pretty heavily loaded. It's a small brush, so it's still not going to hold a ton. And I'm going to do these little flicking pine needles, and I want them to originate from my branch, get a little point to them. And I don't want them overlapping each other, which I'm trying to figure out a good way of saying that. Because if you have them like that, where they are too close to each other and they blend together, you lose your definition. Now don't worry about it. It's going to happen sometimes, and we are going to go back with some other colors. So I'm just touching it to the branch and pulling it out. And I'm kind of cupping it around the end of the branch. Make sure that your brush is loaded up pretty well so you get some coverage and you can actually see the pine needles. Now don't feel like you need to fill them up right now because we are going to be putting up a couple more colors on. I'm trying to make some of them a little longer, some of them a little shorter. So you have some variation. It's okay if some of them overlap other elements. Go back in, get some paint whenever you need to. I really do like to have my brush full so I don't have to keep going back in to my paint. All right. So now we are going to add some Payne's Gray to that green, and you'll get this nice dark green. I think you can see it right here. That's Payne's Gray mixed in with my original green. And I want these to be a little bit on the drier side so I can layer some darker needles on top. Now I'm going to use probably half as many of the dark needles as I have of my lighter needles, and I want to get them in between, not right on top, so you get some shadow and some depth. Can you see the difference there? This one here is a little bit more dry. I'm being a little bit more careful where I'm placing these because I do want them to fill in some of that negative space. All right, just keep putting them in. Remember, half as many of these as you had of your medium green, so you can get some shadow. One more little guy down here. Hope I mixed enough paint. Try to make sure that your needles are different thicknesses, different lengths. This little guy over here. If you overlap them to your previous color, it's just going to look like a big thick blob of green. And we really want them to look like needles, kind of sticking over some of our edges here. All right. Looks pretty good. I'm going to let that dry, and we will go back and put some super light ones on. While that is drying, I'm really thinning out this brown, getting a little bit of that burnt sienna in there. And I'm going to put a few twigs over here. Now I'm just barely touching my paper, just kind of wiggling. All right. I think I need one little one right there. Okay, I think those are dry enough, and we're going to go in with a real light, almost a chartreusey yellowy green here that is a little thicker. And I'm going to put a few bright just to kind of pop that. And because that yellow is a little bit more opaque, hopefully you should be able to see that on top. And there's just a few of these. So if you started out with 100% quantity for your medium green, 50% for your dark green, and then you're going to have about 25% of this chartreuse. Check this out, Carrie decided to come and help us. Carrie, hi. All right, so let's just get our center yellow in, and I'm for the main poinsettia, and I'm actually going to mix a little bit of white in with my, which we hardly ever use, but the Chinese white, and that comes in this kit. It comes in most kits. It's so rarely used, but we're going to use that in our center here. So I mixed it with my yellow, and these ones I had so much water on, they still are not even 100% dry. But that's good because these ones you actually want that color to blend a little bit. Tapping that down. Still trying to make sure I leave a little bit of white showing. Try not to come out too far with your center. All right, so I've still got this light, and I'm going to throw a couple of really light ones on my pine boughs here while I have it on my brush. All right, we can get a little highlight on the inside edge of our veins, just on one side, just on the inside edge. This leaf kind of got lost, but that's okay. All right, and we are all done. So this would be if you wanted to stop here. You can certainly go, like I said, and put in some of those bright metallic-y highlights, but otherwise I think it looks pretty good. What do y'all think? Think maybe it needs a little darkness right there. I think I will just pick up a little bit of my darker green. I'm just going to tap that in, just because I want that a little bit darker. All right. The berries aren't red, Sue, because they're not holly berries, they're mistletoe berries. Mistletoe berries are white. All right, so don't forget to sign it. If you wanted to, if you had metallics, you absolutely could. I'm sure that Navon will definitely be putting some metallic on there. I'm just going to put my initials down here. Any last questions? All right, well, thank you so much for tuning in. And we'll try and do more of these if they go well. And I will be uploading this so y'all can watch it on the replay and do it at your own time. And thank you very much. Bye now.